one.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. I hope if you made it to the last game, I hope you enjoyed our There Will Be Bats game and all of the silliness that it included. I am no longer Stormund. I'm Adam Davis. I'll be moderating this panel talking about Dungeons and Dragons used therapeutically, tabletop role-playing games in general. I would, before we get started with our discussion today, our panel discussion, I would love for all of the panelists to introduce themselves. We can start in the upper left-hand corner with Dr. Elizabeth Kilmer.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Elizabeth Kilmer. I hope that if you were around, you enjoyed There Will Be Bats and our giant guano monster. It was definitely very fun to run. But on this panel today, just so you know a little bit more about me, I am the Director of Training and Education for Game to Grow. I have been running therapeutically applied role-playing game groups for several years now. I have run groups in private practice, in kind of community clinics for children and adolescents with trauma, as well as within the Veterans Affairs system here in the US before starting on with Game to Grow.
Let's just go in order of left to right. So Jared, you'll be next, and then Allison,
right.
and then Adam, and then myself.
Hi, my name is Dr. Jared Kilmer. I am a clinical psychologist with Game to Grow. I serve as the Director of Counseling Services, and I also run therapeutically applied role-playing games here with Game to Grow, as well as historically in the VA system in the Dallas and Waco VAs.
I am Dr. Allison Battles. I am a psychology postdoctoral fellow at the Minneapolis VA and have been running groups there at the Minneapolis VA for about a year. And I'm currently doing a program evaluation kind of research study in conjunction with the therapy groups that I'm running right now.
I'm Adam Johns. I'm one of the co-founders and executive directors of Game to Grow. I've been using role-playing games as a therapeutically applied form of social skill development for about 8 years now, along with Adam Davis. And together we helped form Game to Grow, which is a nonprofit that uses role-playing games, really games of all kinds, as therapeutically for therapeutic, educational, and community growth.
Awesome. And as I said earlier, my name is Adam Davis, just wrapping up the discussion of Adams and founders and executive directors of Game to Grow. Other thing you should know about Game to Grow is we do offer therapeutic social skills groups worldwide to youth and adults. So if you're interested in that, go to gametogrow.org, learn more about that. If you're a veteran, we are also looking to expand our services very soon to include therapeutic programs for veterans. So please check out gametogrow.org/veterans, which I know Chris just put in the chat. Speaking of chat, I would love for you to introduce yourself in the chat. I'm hoping that this panel will be less of us talking to you and more of us all talking together and having a discussion. So introduce yourself in the chat. Also, if you have any questions about the therapeutic application of role-playing games with veterans, with general populations, I would love for you to just throw those questions in there and we can make this a very casual, informal kind of conversation. I'm hoping this can be kind of an intimate get-together. So before we get started, before any questions pop up, I would love for you panelists to talk to me about tabletop role-playing games, Dungeons and Dragons. What makes them so special?
The magic. No, but yes, it is the magic. I'm guessing you're kind of in the sense of like, how are they special in terms of like therapy, or because I could go on and on about my personal love interest in D&D, but
it was intentionally vague because I'm hoping that we can all just kind of cultivate some enthusiasm for a moment for this modality in general. But I am specifically interested in what makes them so effective as a bonus to something that would more traditionally be, you know, we have this stereotype of what a therapy session looks like, where someone's laying back on a chaise and someone else is analyzing their dreams. How is this different than that, and why is it, I don't know, better?
I think one of the things that sticks out for me for why it's, I'm not going to say better, but different, and can be better in some circumstances, is that it doesn't always feel like therapy. It can feel a lot more accessible. It can feel a little bit more experiential. It can feel like you're actually doing things in real time in a way that traditional therapies, oftentimes we're doing a lot more reflecting than we are engaging in actions.
I also want to touch on how tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons are unique compared to other games in that there is a basically limitless set of verbs that you can engage in with whatever actions you are trying to take, as opposed to other tabletop games or video games where you have a very limited verb set.
And I think also going off of that, another really amazing thing is the diversity in which you can create characters. Because there's something pretty powerful in character creation, in which elements of ourselves can be kind of mirrored in those characters, things we find ourselves struggling with, maybe our characters struggling with, or on the flip side, we get to experiment with a whole new way of being. And so I think what makes D&D and just tabletop role play games in general really amazing is that kind of freedom and that narrative component to do something that is really engaging and hands-on, and where you get real-time feedback on how things are going in the game environment. But also doing it in a way that is really fun. Because like what Elizabeth was saying, there could be a lot of burnout from therapy and being really tired with traditional forms of therapy. I think D&D offers a really cool, fun way to go about therapy.
I mean, I think kind of building further on all those great points. I think the thing that really brings it home for me is the play. I have a 3-year-old, and I do a lot of really goofy voices and a lot of really goofy play with my 3-year-old, and I do all that same stuff when I'm playing Dungeons and Dragons, but I don't have that same experience if I'm playing Dominion, if I'm playing Destiny with my friends. It is fun. I'm still having a good time playing those games, but it is something unique to role-playing games that really give me an accessibility to speak in funny voices, or an accessibility to dive in and be playful in a way that even as a professional game master, I can sometimes find it hard to access within other parts of my life. But Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games in general really open up the door to that access in a much easier fashion.
So it sounds like
Absolutely,
one
Adam.
of the great things about this game is that it's fun and people want to come back to it. And it's like, I see a therapist, and I like my therapist just fine, but sometimes before therapy I'm like, ugh. And if I was going for my therapy to go play Dungeons and Dragons, there might still be some of that, I'm gonna have to process this and talk about this, but also there's like I might get a chance to fight a gigantic guano golem or something like that. Maybe more fun and exciting. Is that something that you see with the individuals you work with in a therapeutic context? Do you see some of that? I mean, Allison, you kind of mentioned this a little bit, but like the kind of burnout with therapy, or the kind of like trepidation with coming to a therapy context?
100%. I think especially within the VA, veterans may have experienced a wide variety of therapies offered at the VA and may find themselves feeling really stuck, may find themselves feeling really burnt out on traditional forms of, especially talk therapy. And so this offers a way for it to be experiential and to be pretty fun. And I know, especially as I think about, the group I'm running right now, one of the guys who's involved with us, kind of noted like, normally I drop out of groups before, now, but I keep on wanting to come back to this. And there's something really powerful about, a group where it's fun and it's also inherently social and activating.
And to piggyback off of that, it's not just attractive to the individuals who may be like burned out or disillusioned with traditional therapy, but there's a chunk of the population that traditional therapy just isn't interesting or as effective. So this provides I think a natural alternative that really resonates with a good chunk of the population.
And for some people, it can be adjunctive as well. So they might be engaged in individual therapy, but this can be a really nice kind of extra place to be able to really engage with other people, to practice some of the skills they might have been talking about more explicitly in individual therapy, or to kind of have this space to try out and process, especially if they're working on things like trust, right? Playing a game with other people is an amazing way to start to understand, like, how does someone respond to me when I act this way? Can I trust this person in this fantasy setting? And we might think of that as like silly, right? If you can trust someone in a fantasy setting, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. But especially for people who have really felt like they can't trust anyone in any situation for a while, potentially even decades, having that experience of being able to trust someone in a game is a big deal.
So Do you want to add to that, Adam?
No, actually, I think you guys all covered that really well. I don't have anything particular to add to that. That's really good.
Awesome. Jared, you'd mentioned that it's not just for people who are burnt out with therapy, but people who have maybe wanting to try it for the first time. Maybe it's an adjunct for therapy. What kinds of things do you work on if you're thinking about someone who would ideally be well suited for this kind of intervention? What is that? Who is that person?
So a lot of where the benefits come from in this game is these social interactions, the opportunity to be different from how you might be in your typical environment and practice skills that you may not be comfortable leveraging in typical interactions. Whether that be like learning how to notice and manage your own impulsivity, or practicing effective communication strategies, learning how to like effectively hold the frustration that comes from setbacks in any of your interactions. These kind of groups are really great for just practicing new skills, putting on new hats.
I think kind of building on that idea, it really broadens the applicable challenges that you can really address with it. I mean, what you're talking about, Jared, are like literally almost all the things you do in therapy, which is to like practice skills, to build tolerance, to build better understanding, to build a better ability to communicate. Like those are that's a huge chunk of all the stuff that you just already do in therapy for almost everything.
Right.
And I certainly from my perspective, it seems like the game itself, under the hands, under the direction of somebody who really knows what they're doing and who knows is the population of the people that they're working with, and as a professional in that way, has this potential to be useful in this hugely broad range of challenges.
Yeah, the cool thing is that even though we're doing the same kind of things we were doing in traditional therapy, it doesn't feel the same way. It feels much more playful. And a lot of the benefits for those who may be, less interested in the therapy process get to experience them in a more covert manner. They're there, they're just not what's being highlighted necessarily.
And I think you also lean into something really powerful also in the sense of there's not necessarily, one right person for this type of, treatment or intervention, if you will. It's one where, because it is pulling so many of those things that are oftentimes addressed across different types of therapies, that you're also seeing addressed here. It allows for folks with wide variety of, areas of struggle, areas of challenge to be able to benefit from the group. I know, at least in my groups, we see kind of a wide range of folks coming in with various different types of mental health concerns, and all of them in their own way find a lot of benefit. And it's also about kind of tailoring the group itself to meet the individual needs. And that's, I think, where D&D also becomes super cool, because then you can create, you may have like, yes, I'm thinking of doing this campaign, but okay, this group is going an entirely different way and their goals are different. So let's craft them something unique in the moment with that. And I think there's also something that has to come from the person running it, because it is definitely hard to both run a D&D game and do therapy at the same time. But when done well, it can be the coolest experience.
That's a nice segue to the Game to Grow training program, if anyone is interested. It is hard to do, and it does require some specific levels of training. Thank you, Allison. Allison, you also mentioned the group and how important that group is, and G-Dubs mentioned in the chat that the bonds are so important, and I'm curious for y'all to talk about what this experience is like, not just as a facilitator, GM-led experience of guiding the insight, growth, and change, but also how does the group structure actually inform that process?
I think we're all being kind to each other.
Right.
I was actually specifically I was actually specifically waiting for Jared and Elizabeth, as we've had lots of conversations about group, specifically group therapy and the dynamics of group therapy and the importance and value of group therapy. So I know you guys could talk. You have talked my ear off specifically about this. So
whether we have engaged in therapeutic groups, or we have helped set up social skills groups. One thing that I've noticed in terms of feedback we've gotten from the veterans is that engaging in these games has like been a really valuable component of civilian life post-military, where many veterans have like reported back to me, I haven't felt like a member of a team or been able to like be this connected to my peers in a long time since I've left the military. And this is not the military, but it is a very comforting piece to have returned back to my life.
Absolutely. I think we hear oftentimes that like you're getting to keep the teamwork and you're getting to keep that sense of community without necessarily needing to hold on to some of the other pieces that you might be ready to let go of from the military. And I think that's something that's really, really powerful, especially because if we think about for any human being, right? We often learn how to be in groups and we learn how to form friendships by literally being forced to spend time with other people. So either in school or in work or in the military, especially, we kind of build these bonds. But then if you move kind of outside of that, maybe you work from home or you don't want to be friends with your coworkers, you just want to be friendly with them, which is okay. It can be really hard to figure out like, how am I supposed to make friends? How am I like, I don't just want to go to a bar or a coffee shop and start talking to random strangers. Like that sounds awful. And those random strangers probably don't want to be talking to random strangers. And so figuring out kind of another way that you can start to build these bonds in a way that is supported, where there are some rules. We talk a lot about kind of creativity. You have to have some bounds so that you can be your most creative self. I think we often see that socially as well. You have to have some idea of how this is supposed to go or what this might look like for you to really be able to be your most authentic and genuine self.
And I think also going off of, being genuine and authentic and having like the scaffolding there, I think that's another part of the group coming together and bonding, because kind of progressively I've seen over the groups is, folks start to ask for more feedback. There may be kind of early on like a bit of kind of modeling of what, giving appropriate feedback to one another and being receptive to that may look like. But over the course of the group, as they come together, overcoming, shared struggles of, fighting ogres or having to do some, crazy dungeon puzzle and working together to overcome those, they start to give each other more and more feedback. And it ends up being kind of another element that further bonds the group, because it's one thing to be able to play together. It's another thing to be able to genuinely share with one another.
Yeah, I feel like the shared stories is a really big part that brings people together. The moments that I watch the players at the table, reminisce about something that happened, or share inside jokes about an experience that they've all had together. And I think one of the real values of a game like Dungeons and Dragons or any role playing game is that it's an ongoing story. So you get to have this same group of people that are coming in all together and that are building that bond and that relationship and that, to some extent, understanding of each other, but certainly a trust and a comfort with one another over that time. And I think a role-playing game seems to do that faster or maybe more effectively, in my experience, than just sitting down and hanging out and talking with each other, maybe because of the shared stories or because of the shared challenges that they're facing.
Oh yeah.
A lot of it is theater of the mind. A lot of it requires some suspension of belief or disbelief. I haven't said that phrase in a long time, so I don't remember anymore. And because of that, those most resonant moments, those emotional pieces, the greatest points of learning within the game, rarely do we look back on that and picture the table. We remember what we were imagining in our minds, like we were really there. And I think that really catalyzes some of this experiential learning aspects that come through this game.
And to kind of pull back to what Adam said as well, in terms of kind of building this community and building it faster. So a lot of my training in group psychotherapy, like our traditional process groups, comes from an interpersonal process or a YALM. And I'm not going to get all into all of the jargon, but there are these kind of about 11 therapeutic factors. This idea of like, okay, so we know that group therapy is helpful, but like how? What is it about group therapy that's helpful? And a lot of what is so helpful and important about group therapy is the group, right? The ability to give and receive feedback, the ability to be altruistic and to help other people, to be able to ask for help, to be able to give advice. And we see in group therapy, there's a whole kind of timeline of the kind of development of the group over time. And in D&D groups, I've seen that same development, but I often see it happen on a much faster timeline. And I think a lot of that has to do with actually actively engaging in these scenarios that allow you to see how people respond to these ideas that that mirror real life. And so it feels like we can start to get to know people better. We might not know what their favorite food is, but we have a better understanding of how they're going to react in stressful or funny situations in a way that's a little bit harder to get to when we're just talking.
I definitely see how the group can improve a bond, and I love that idea of shared stories. Literally, we just finished playing D&D like half an hour ago. So I, of course, have all these images in my mind, and I know that the next time, whenever it happens, I see that same crew of people that I was just playing with, we're gonna have a inside joke reference point about like guano fights, right? Like
you were going to talk about that forever.
We now have this like, and also Chris's character tripping us all into a well. Like we have all these sort of reference points for each other that I do literally picture in my mind's eye as if it was something that really happened. I'm not picturing sitting in this room at this table. I'm picturing being covered in guano in a cave. And I can totally see how those things create that sort of shared identity and that social bond over shared cultural norms. I'm also curious about feedback, how we help each other in a group space, both with certainly on modeling, we could talk a little bit about that and how we can learn from each other just by being exposed to other ways of thinking. But I'm also curious about how the game can be used for people to give each other that sort of, with that peer reciprocality, how do you give critical feedback and positive feedback in a way that supports that sort of insight, growth, and change?
I feel like giving really, really effective feedback. Obviously, there's that trust piece, and there is the piece oriented at can we withstand me maybe tripping over my words a little bit, maybe not doing the best job, and you'll give me the benefit of the doubt, knowing that we've had a lot of history together, and so you trust me even if I didn't phrase that the right way, even if I didn't maybe said something that could have been taken the wrong way, but you're going to give me that benefit of the doubt. I think that really comes with that camaraderie and with that trust. But I also think that one of the real benefits of something like a therapeutically applied role-playing game is that you've got the coach right there. You've got the person to be who's the game master or the therapist who's right there, who's ready to rephrase or ready to offer a new phrasing, or even, and we do this, Adam and I will do this all the time in games, but even being able to say, like, what is it that your character needs to hear right now that this other person's now going to say, and setting up scenes in the reverse, being able to demonstrate, here's what you could be looking for. Here's how you can phrase this thing so that you can help get along better with your teammate. And we can set all of that up kind of in advance, showing you really what that effective communication is going to look like.
Yeah, this process does help grease the wheels with difficult conversations or like just critical communication, wherein like IRL critical conversations, we may not always be able to pull back and have a meta conversation about what's happening and what each other needs. But this game is set up in such a way where, like, as Adam was just describing, we can pull back and say, well, what does so-and-so need to hear? What is the bottom line message that's trying to be communicated? And how can we build that to be most successful?
And I think another way that the game also lends itself to that feedback process is that it's, there are the really impactful moments whenever it's, player to player giving one another feedback, but there is kind of a building process to establish the scaffolding, okay, that this is a space that you can do that this is a place where this is going to be a part of the group. Because there's not as many opportunities, if we just kind of step out into our own lives and kind of look for opportunities to give that direct feedback, we may find ourselves feeling a little more challenged. So creating that space where it's like, this is where we do this is where we practice this, can really help. And I find that is both through like me and I have a co-facilitator with me in the group. And this is something I got from Elizabeth and Jared in particular, kind of like dropping like a nugget of, observation or interpretation. If nobody picks it up, continue to move on. Because it's still building in that kind of like processing of like, oh, what would my character, how would they react in this moment? Wow, that NPC did not seem to like how I approached this conversation. Maybe there is something happening. And that also takes me into the power of the NPC, because NPCs are a great way to be able to have mock conversations that are challenging or difficult, or you have to make compromises, something like that, where the NPC themselves can also give that feedback and do that modeling process as well.
Oh, there's a story there. There's several stories there, I'm sure.
Yeah. It's one of those, so I know for me, like, I also enjoy throwing in a bit of kind of just crazy NPCs. And I had this one, it was like a really, really divey bar in like the rundown part of town. Like they go in and it's just classic seedy bar, everybody with their hoods up, nobody like making eye contact. And so they go to the bar itself and they go up and there's this old, elven man, and he is bananas. And so he's just kind of like getting up in their face and just like, it's like, you're not gonna pull one on old Willie. And he just gets up in them, and the group was like, I don't know how to respond to this. And so they experimented with different ways of trying to approach this, really not, kind of following social norms type of character. And they had to experiment with different ways to work it through. And he even had a moment where the character stepped back and was like, wow, I really wish there was a way that y'all could be able to, have a conversation among yourselves to figure out what you want to do. And so it like pulled them out of the game to be able to decide together, okay, we've tried this, this, and this. How are we going to make this situation work together? And it was really fun to kind of see them hit some roadblocks and then get really creative with thinking around those roadblocks. So yes, and that is all my acting for tonight. Good night, folks. that is all I got for you.
It just got me thinking about like stories with NPCs and what are some of the best moments where an NPC like really helped kind of grease the interaction or grease the wheels of what's going on. I had a player that was really struggling to engage in play parts of the game, really good at the combat, really good at jumping into the like the statistics of the game, but really struggled to engage in role play. And all the players were coming into a town where there was a big party, a big celebration that was happening. And this one player, I asked them what they were going to do as their character, what their character would do, and I kind of predicted this ahead of time, but they said, I stand off to the side and I do nothing. And I said, great, you're crossing your arms off to the side, looking all grumpy out, this big celebration happening. And somebody else scooches up next to you, also looks really grumpy and goes, you hate parties too? Yeah, me too. I hate parties. This is just the worst. And then the whole time he's going, no, get away from me. You I don't want to talk to you. And he's like, yeah, I don't want to talk to anybody at parties either. Oh, I hate them so much. I don't want to celebrate. I don't want to do any of that. And then we spent probably 5 minutes with my NPC basically chasing his character around, talking about how much he hates talking to other people and celebrating and things like that. But it got him engaged. He was smiling and he was having a great time, being grumpy about being engaged in the whole process. It's just a perfect example of like, let's set you up for success. And one of the great things about, Dungeons and Dragons or a role-playing game world is I can put in absolute characters, totally over the top, ridiculous, cartoony characters that can come in and be what I need them to be in that moment to help that player along.
Yeah, it's rare to get to say that someone could revel in grumpiness.
The guy was eating rice cakes because he refused to eat the holiday food. So he was like offering rice cakes to the player. I was like, yeah, I don't want to eat anything delicious either. Here, have this.
Man. That's so good.
That is really glorious.
So a question came in from chat earlier that I want to come back to because I wanted to get a context for what this looks like in the session before I sort of expanded this. So you were all talking about being the game master who's also the person who is the therapist, who has that training. What does it look like if there is both a therapist and a game master, either in conjunction? Elizabeth, you had mentioned earlier that this is not necessarily a replacement for therapy. Sometimes an individual can come to an applied role-playing game session and also have a therapist. I want to talk about what that sort of suite of services that might be best suited for individuals and what that looks like, the collaboration between a game master and a therapist.
Yeah, so you're talking about like, is this a replacement versus...
And what does it look like when it's not? If it's in conjunction with a therapist, when the game master is able to provide something, but that person is also in therapy, what does that look like when there's a collaboration?
Absolutely. So anytime we're thinking about engaging in dual therapy services, we want to be really careful about that, because the last thing we want is for one therapist to be working on one place and one therapist to be working on another thing and not to be communicating, because that can be really confusing and distressing and potentially problematic. Now, where we kind of, so I generally never recommend anybody to be in two individual kind of therapy treatments at the same time, unless there's very extenuating circumstances. But because this is a group modality, what I generally recommend is for the therapist to just be in communication. So I did this a lot at the VA, where individuals enrolled in my group might also be enrolled in individual therapy services. And oftentimes, the specific things that they were working on in individual therapy around, for example, trauma or anxiety or depression, or mood disorders or psychosis, were not directly represented in the game that may have been problematic. And that was a bad way to explain, but let me kind of back that up a little bit. So what I mean by that is oftentimes what we're working on in therapeutically applied role-playing games are the abilities and the skills to engage in authentic and genuine relationships with other people successfully. And that might be something that individual therapy is working on, but oftentimes in individual therapy, we're talking about explicit skills. We might be challenging thoughts. We might be getting real deep into metaphors. We might be kind of setting a game plan. And so this is something that can be really, really helpful to have kind of on the side. It gives us real life practice in a way that feels supported. But generally, it's going to be super in line or separate enough from what's happening in the therapy room that we're not worried about kind of problematic overlap. For some people, this can replace individual therapy, depending on what their goals are. For others, they want it to be kind of an additive. It's really going to depend on the individual and their goals.
Yeah, I don't really have much more to add. It's like, yes, that. But I think especially kind of the part of like for folk, there are definitely folks where like they may have gone through treatment themselves. They're kind of finding that they're wanting something to transition to not seeing an individual therapist, on a weekly basis. And the group can be really great in terms of like activating and applying skills that maybe were learned in individual therapy. So I think that's there's a lot of ways that it can kind of come about.
I also think that there's a tremendous value in if you're seeing especially a separate individual therapist and a separate group, therapeutically applied dungeon master, then either having them communicating with each other or even having an individual therapist who really understands what's going on in a role-playing game and the opportunities that it provides really seems to make a gigantic difference in individuals that I've worked with, both in individual therapy and in groups. Being able to have that communication with the other outside therapist really makes a huge difference. Or even in the rare circumstances that I've had the opportunity to work with somebody individually and work with them in a group setting, being able to hop back and forth and have them come in for individual and say like, yeah, some interesting stuff happened in that last time in the game. Let's talk about that a little bit and process that a little bit more with you individually. And there's just a lot of opportunity and a lot of now the opportunity to really dig in and think about that a lot more.
And I know when I've worked with therapists who are of the therapists of the participants in some of my groups, we've aligned certainly on shared language. A lot of the youth participants have short words or phrases that are used as sort of heuristics to define a whole lot of meaning. And so when the therapist can share that with me, I can then utilize it in group, like, oh, I can tell your engine is a little yellow right now, or whatever those kinds of meaning structures that the participant now understands. I can use those and build on those. So I know that we can have some sort of connection there in aligning on what our goals are for that person. That's been really helpful, as well as just knowing what kinds of goals the individual has, and we can bring them up in the actual game. How do you see what I just mentioned, like building the structures of the game themselves? We talked about this a little bit the other day, Elizabeth and Jared, around designing the in-game scenarios really for challenging and providing that opportunity to practice those things. But I'm curious, especially from Allison and Adam, what does that look like, sort of the balance between game master intentionality and trust the process and see what happens and respond appropriately?
I feel like that's one that I'm ever learning on, of finding that balance. But I think there is something, in especially starting off the group with really kind of creating a scaffold for this is kind of what we can expect to happen during the course of the session. We'll engage in gameplay, we'll then move to post-game processing. These are kind of the things you'll be able to, kind of have knowledge on to create that structure. But then I think it's from there of being just really intentional with what are the group's goals, what are kind of each person working on, and being able to craft, sometimes even on the fly, a kind of like moment narratively for that to be something to kind of engage in the gameplay itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think so much of it is done on the fly. I mean, not to say that we don't jump in. Did we lose Dr. Battles?
You lost her.
So.
I'll message her.
Wow. Not to say that it isn't important that we do a lot of design stuff ahead of time. I mean, in the planning process, we often are going through and thinking about this particular player really could use an opportunity to shine because they really struggled last session, or this other player really needs to learn how to do some teamwork oriented engagement, and so we're going to put them into a situation where we know that they can't solve this on their own, no matter how clever they may be, no matter how creative they may be. They're going to have to involve their teammates, and there's lots of little situations like that we prompt ahead of time, that I'm going to plan for ahead of time, and I'm going to set up those situations. But so much of the game really comes down to what the individual reactions are, and the in moment reactions, where I can suddenly shift gears to go, oh, this is a perfect opportunity for growth for this one particular player, and not one that I was planning for, but now because I know them well, because I've interacted with them lots, I'm going to shift my gears even to the extent of completely derailing and changing my story to deliver this one moment.
There's a story there too.
There is a story there. Which one did you have in mind?
I don't know, but I know with your 8 years of experience, there's probably stories about that spontaneous moment of, whoa, this is something that I wasn't expecting, and now I'm going to respond to it, and here's an opportunity for insight or growth, and anyone can jump in there, I think.
Can I add a comment while Adam's thinking of his awesome story?
Also a comment over here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that's really helpful to think about as that balance, right? So much of it is going to be reaction based, but that doesn't mean that you're not prepared, right? So, and this is something that will develop over time, but especially when I was first starting out, like I would talk to other clinicians that were doing the same kind of work and kind of talk about their stories, listen to stories that Adam have told, and kind of brainstorm like, okay, if I'm working on these skills, right, I often go back to the treatment plan. If I'm working on these skills, what are the kinds of things that could support these goals? So either written on a piece of paper or in the back of my mind, I'm already thinking about like ways in which if players do this, I could respond this way, so that when I am responding in the moment, I'm able to intentionally respond in a way that is consistent with my therapeutic goals instead of just responding as a GM. Mm-hmm. And there's sometimes a little bit of a difference there.
And there's a couple things that like we can do to prompt these moments. In my own therapeutic groups, having a conversation at the beginning of the session, like what are some of our like daily goals? What are some of the things that we are going to intentionally look for or work on while we're together? Most of the time, group members are comfortable and want to share what their treatment goals are with each other. Hey, I'm working on impulsivity, or hey, I want to be more engaged in interpersonal communication. I want to check in with the party more often than I typically do. It's an intention of mine, but please hold me responsible if you notice a moment and I don't. But I don't know if this is more of a comment on my game mastering style or my therapeutic style. I think it's the latter, but I try to prompt those moments. I try to find a catalyst to like elicit a therapeutic learning moment, but it doesn't matter to me really how that moment goes, because in the processing component later on, it's all just grist for the mill. Whether it went exactly the way they hoped or the very opposite, it's a very interesting learning experience. And the fact that they were there, I think, is more important than the outcome.
Yeah, and I think that's really where, you know, the collaborative storytelling component of this really comes in, right? Is I'm going to set up scenarios, or I'm going to set up things to happen in the game, and then give the opportunity for the story to wind, for things to go in a different direction than what maybe I was planning. Because ultimately, the thing that I'm most interested in is providing that opportunity, and then where necessary, providing the coaching or providing the guidance to help you get through that experience. I thought of a story, actually pretty recently.
I'm going to pause you real quick, Adam, before you tell that story. Just keep you on the edge of your seat. I just wanted to let the chat know we have just around 10 minutes left, and if they have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. We can get to them while we have time. We have a hard stop at 4:30 because we are going to start preparing for the next game that Adam Johns is running. So I just wanted to make sure the chat knew. If you had any questions, now is the time. Back to you, Adam. What's your story?
Sorry. Last time, very recently, actually, we had a game where one of my players had created this whole backstory about their character having been a noble person and having run away from home, and really trying to like make their way on their own. And based on the backstory and everything that they had done, I was trying to wrap that backstory back into our campaign and let it be like a really crucial moment where their character gets to reveal that they're a noble person, and the rest of the players in the group get a chance to react to that, which has all sorts of value. And based on the backstory, I had assumed they had a poor relationship with their noble family. And so I set up the scenario where my player at the table was going to be confronted and sort of dragged unwillingly back home. And I set up this whole opportunity, and then the head of their house's security showed up and said, "You're coming with me." And then the player was like, "Okay, I understand." And then like totally went along with them. And then all the rest of the players at the table, just like me, were like, "Well, we got to break them out. We got to get her out of the situation that she's in." And I'm turning to this player and going, "Is that what you want?" And she was like, "No, I'm gonna go home and make sure things are good with my family, and make sure things that are healthy, and I want to make sure that they know that I'm safe." And I was like, "Well, I had originally planned a whole combat. I had planned all this other stuff. I was expecting this to turn into a huge storyline about the family being like really corrupt, and even this head of security also being pretty corrupt." And I'm like, "Well, that's all gone now, because I'm not going to turn down, like, you have a healthy relationship with your parents and you want to make sure that that's maintained. Like, I'm not going to give that up." So now all of a sudden I had to pivot the whole day's planning into, awesome, how do you communicate with the rest of your team that you're safe, that this is the right choice, this is going to be the most helpful thing, and also you've got these other problems that are going on. How are you going to solve those problems while you're maybe being dragged away back to home? And it was just turned into a great opportunity where everybody got to talk about their character's motivation and talk about their character's thought process, all while they were literally in separate carriages and couldn't communicate to each other. So it was just a great chance to reveal a lot of that stuff without ever actually revealing it in character to each other. But it definitely this happened just a couple of weeks ago. So this has completely derailed my campaign, and now I have to completely reestablish what exactly it is that we're going to be doing.
I remember co-designing that combat with you. That it's a bummer you didn't get to use that.
Yeah, it was a cool combat. I had like designed a really cool. Yeah,
Game masters must be flexible. I'm sure everyone can recognize that. You must be responsive, not reactive, to quote something that I believe Elizabeth said in our training last weekend. Was that yesterday? That was yesterday, wasn't it?
It's been a long week.
It's been a long 24 hours. Yeah.
Who knows what's going on? I don't even know what day it is.
I thought it was a week ago. No. Anyone else have a story about a time that they needed to be responsive to one of those spontaneous moments of insight that you maybe had a plan you had to toss out, anything like that?
I don't know if the story is overtold, Elizabeth, but I can't help but think about it.
There are
I
no
think
overtold
it's
stories.
I think it
They're
is
all great.
overtold, but I will tell it because it is one of my favorite stories. So this was the first the first or second session for a lot of my players in a group at the VA. And several of the players had talked about kind of really wanting to work on impulsivity, that had kind of caused problems. We kind of get it started, and they're off on their adventure. They're going to go save some village children that have been captured. And they're traveling down this road, and all of a sudden they hear this rustling in the bushes. And in my head, I'm like, yeah, there's going to be like this cute little animal that jumps out, and they're going to be like, oh, this is kind of startling, but like, this is fine. But instead, I am like, hey, there's this rustling in the bushes, and this small creature jumps out at you. And before that, I can explain that it is this adorable tiny baby owlbear that's really cute and has a little beak and these little feathers, and it's adorable. The player in the front says, I stab it with my knife. And I had several options here, right? I could have said, let me tell you what you see before you stab it with your knife, right? Like, I can slow down time like that. Or I can say, like, man, what do you think's going to happen if you stab that with your knife, right? Like, I have this ability to slow down this time to increase this insight in the moment. Or I let him stab it with a knife and then deal with the consequences. And for this particular player, I knew them well enough, and I knew my group well enough, right? It's important to note that this is not a decision I would have made with every group. I said, yeah, roll. See if you hit it. He hit it. He hit it. And this baby owlbear wasn't doing so great. And the player kind of stopped and was like, oh man, this is what I do in my real life. I mean, like, I don't stab people, but like, this is how I act. I feel threatened, and I assume it must be a threat, and I act as though it is a threat, and oftentimes it's not. And I've really hurt people's feelings, and I've really screwed up some opportunities. And I don't think I realized how often I did it, but I do it all the time. And there's more to that story, and some like kind of more in terms of other group members also had some insight to take away from this. But I think that is a really great example of, I had these multiple options, and multiple of those options would have led to a therapeutic outcome. And so it's about kind of understanding myself as a therapist, what my goals are for that session, and my goals are for the player themselves, to be able to make that decision, to decide where we're going from here. They then had to fight the mom owlbear that was really upset, and was not able to be calmed down because they had just hurt one of her babies. But then they got to adopt a baby owlbear, and they named it Roadkill, and they kept it with them. This was a rolling admission. So we had groups, like, by the time this group was over, this owlbear had gone through 4 or 5 different groups of players and was still the team mascot.
That's fantastic.
That's awesome.
I got a question in the chat, and then my device sort of decided it didn't want to do that anymore. So I don't have it in front of me anymore. So I'm going to remember it the best way that I can. Unless, Elizabeth, you have it in front of you, because I know that you are also in the chat. Yeah, would you read that chat? My device just.
Yeah. So Queer Adventure Time asked, how do you reconcile player boundaries, consent, and autonomy with these plot points or actions that just happen to characters without their choice? I can jump in with a quick answer, but I just asked the question. Okay. As the GM, you can pause time, right? So I have some ground rules, like if a player wants to cast a spell on another player or steal something another player. This is actually something that I got from Adam and Adam. That doesn't necessarily happen unless everybody decides that it is going to be like they consent to that, right? So it's not, we don't let the dice decide. And that's something that works pretty well in my groups. And it's a great kind of conversation about consent. And that's something that I can just own as, like, this is what I think is important. And we move forward with that rule.
As a therapist as well, like I think every group therapy setting should kick off with some ground rules and expectations and acknowledgement of why we are coming together and what are our goals as individuals and as a group, and where are we going and where are we not going. And with a lot of the therapeutic groups that we've gotten to run with individuals with mental health concerns, sometimes there are just content that is triggering to an individual. And it might just be one of the individuals in that group, but that is valid and important. And so for each person around the table to say, I would like to make sure that X, Y, and Z does not occur during our games. It's personally important to me, is a great way to establish consent on the front end and to continuously check in about that as we move forward.
Mm-hmm. And that's also like for me, we do kind of brief pre-group interviews just to make sure they feel the group's a good fit. And even during that, I kind of prompt them that, we're going to be having that discussion of boundaries and consent and what content is okay for them. And it's one where if they have something in that moment that they immediately are like, this, I don't want that to be in the game. I take note of that, but it's also one where they kind of mull it over and come to group, kind of thinking more constructively through like what could be things that would be really activating for me. And then also with that, expressing that to the group, because I think that's also a big part, because it is possible that we'll kind of go through something will come up during the course of the gameplay. And in that moment, there may be kind of somebody may have a reaction to that and have to have that pause moment of like, hey, this is something that's, I'm finding really activating for me. I'm going to need, for us to switch it. And so it's creating that space for them to be able to say so, especially on the front end of already expressing kind of no-go content areas for themselves.
I feel like especially in regards to thinking about consent, thinking about autonomy in role-playing games, a lot of it is not too dissimilar to me interacting with my friends or anybody else interacting.
Glad we're back.
And that's why I think everybody really needs to start their games off with cupcakes. So
Yeah,
really.
Cupcakes, 100%.
Yeah.
Always. That is actually one of the saddest things from the pandemic. I have nobody to share baked goods with anymore. And that was like an outlet, and I can't share anymore. And now I just can't bake because nobody needs 24 cupcakes in their household.
Yeah, I am so anxious about our show for all of the viewers at home. Adam did not finish the story. It did not involve cupcakes.
Well, we have about 4 minutes left. So with our last 4 minutes, I just want to throw out to everyone who's watching and in the chat that if you want to learn more about Game to Grow, go to gametogrow.org. If you're interested in our veterans programming, check out gametogrow.org/veterans. Make sure you support Wounded Warrior Project here during Warrior Week. I'd love to have the panelists. You all have about a minute and 20 seconds per person. What's the last thing you would love for anyone watching to take with them after this panel is over?
If you're interested in this, reach out, right? Like take the first step, sign up for a wait list, whether that is to facilitate or to play a game, right? Like take that first step, just that first one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Try something new. If you haven't gotten to engage in a game like this before, I strongly encourage you to reach out and explore. But if you have, this is a communal experience, as you probably already know. Find someone who hasn't tried this before as well and share this with them.
I think for me, especially as I think about the group, my biggest thing is, the notion that therapy can be fun and it is okay to pretend and play and enjoy yourself while also, working on personal recovery. And very much like, Elizabeth and Jared were saying, if it's something you're interested, get involved. If you are a veteran and you're, have providers in the VA system, maybe even ask if this is something that they are maybe doing at their VA, because you never know when crazy interns and trainees come along to start these groups that go on to be really phenomenal experiences. And I put that plug because all three of us were interns and et ceteras whenever we first got our groups going.
Yeah, boy, that's the truth. I think my biggest takeaway from the panel is that Dr. Battles will make baked goods and send them to me.
Yeah,
after COVID is over.
Got you. Yes.
And I guess just to remind everybody that like the real power of this is just like the power in counseling, which is relationships are a hugely important part of that. Knowing your players, knowing the people that you're in the group with, and building on that relationship is hugely important. And the opportunity to be playful within the setting really means a lot. And being able to make it fun or being able to make it interesting and engaging is very, very important.
Awesome. The play's the thing. Fantastic. Thank you all so much. Please follow Game to Grow. We're on Twitter and all those things. Make sure you support Wounded Warrior Project. And we'll see you all in half an hour for the game that Adam Johns will run. And I will not be Stormund. I'm gonna be hard and slapper snaps. See you in half an hour.
Yes.